Welcome to LIGNET.com. I'm Fred Fleitz. Joining me today is Dr. Mark Groombridge. Mark is LIGNET's deputy editor and an expert on China. Mark, welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
Mark, I wanted to talk to you today about the wrap-up of the 18th Chinese Communist Party Congress, which closed on Wednesday of this week. I first wanted to ask you, did you see any surprises out of this conference?
I thought there was one big one, and that was how the rhetoric of the speeches essentially reinforced speeches from past party congresses. There's been a lot of talk about the need for China to reform both economically and politically. But outgoing President Hu Jintao, who's been the president for the past 10 years, he basically doubled down and insisted quite vigorously throughout all of his remarks about the need for power to remain concentrated within the Chinese Communist Party itself. Sure, he spoke a little bit about some reform at the local level, but it was very clear that he wanted to continue to promote the stability of the current leadership structure and system, where power is highly concentrated in just a very few individuals. And in a way, he did not in any way suggest that he was amenable to having Xi Jinping, who's likely to be his successor, almost certain to be, behave in any more accountable or transparent way.
Well, Mark, tell me about Xi Jinping and some of the other leaders who were elected or will soon be elected to be the top officials of China.
Well, what's interesting about all of them is that all 7 of the members of the Politburo, including the 5 who are almost certain to be elected tomorrow, in addition to Xi Jinping and his Prime Minister Li Keqiang, is that all 7 of them are the children of notable revolutionary figures from China during the Communist Revolution. And the category or the term that people use to refer to these individuals is princelings, or sometimes red nobility. And what's important to understand about these princelings or members of the red nobility is that they not only possess political power, but they also have injected themselves, or their family members have, throughout the Chinese economy. Many of their family members are in positions of economic power through their leadership in state-owned enterprises or special economic zones. And so the point being is that there's a nexus or intersection, if you will, with political power and economic power, which is a concern for many in China because of the prospects or fears that might result in corruption.
Well, Mark, let's talk about corruption. President Hu made some pretty tough comments about this issue at the opening of the Congress, as you and I discussed earlier. Did anything come of this at the Congress?
Well, the rhetoric was certainly very tough, but there's virtually no indication that there's going to be substantive change on the matter in terms of political reform or new laws or promulgation of new procedures or regulations to try to break up this intersection or this nexus of the political elite and the economic elite. And so while Hu Jintao's outgoing remarks were very tough, it's unclear what that's going to actually mean in terms of practice, particularly since the 7 members of the Politburo themselves have amassed great economic wealth, as not only themselves personally, but with through their extended family members as well. And so while Hu's remarks were tough, it's not clear in practice what's going to ultimately change.
Some experts have said that there is growing discontent in China and that this is an issue that senior Chinese officials are concerned about. Could you talk about that as it concerns the Chinese Congress?
Sure. Well, and it is a palpable concern, and I think the Chinese leadership recognizes this, but they face a dilemma or a catch-22 because they themselves almost certainly have engaged in corrupt activities themselves. But there is growing discontent in the population, and I would say it centers around primarily 2 issues. One is the increasing wealth inequality or rich-poor gap, where the political and economic elite are far outdistancing themselves in terms of their power vis-a-vis the rest of the population. But I also think that there's growing discontent in terms of broader issues related to the rule of law. Environmental degradation, is a serious problem in China. There have been other instances, for example, some of our viewers may recall that there was an earthquake in southwest China about 2 or 3 years ago, in which a number of children were killed because it happened during the day and they were at school. And ultimately it was learned that the company that constructed those schools followed shoddy procedures, which made it very easy for those buildings to collapse. So while the people may not be clamoring for democracy necessarily, they certainly are clamoring, and there's growing discontent over the fact that there's a sense of unfairness. And I think that stems directly from the fact that the Chinese Communist Party continues to monopolize power and behave in an unaccountable and non-transparent way.
I have a final question, and that's about Xi Jinping, the new Chinese president, and what his presidency could mean concerning relations with the United States. According to the media, his daughter is going to Harvard under a pseudonym, and he has visited the United States. What can you say about how this new president's policies will be any different than the last president, and how will they affect the United States?
My guess is that relations between China and the U.S. are fairly stable. Xi Jinping is a well-known entity in the United States. He studied in Iowa as a student in his younger days, but more importantly, for about the last 4 years, it's been pretty clear that Xi Jinping, who was vice president for the last 5 years, it was quite clear that he was the person who was going to be elevated to the presidency. But he's a very cautious individual. He tends not to, and I think that's part of the reason why he successfully rose to power. He tends to be, he's known as a consensus builder. So I would actually look more to some of Hu Jintao's remarks, or outgoing remarks, about where he sees China going. And he made it quite clear during his remarks, and I imagine Xi Jinping is going to follow pretty closely to Hu Jintao's policies of maintaining, rising defense budgets, but also laying down a clear marker that China, for example, wants to continue to defend its maritime interests, which is essentially code for saying that they'll continue to pursue an aggressive policy in the South China Sea, and that conflict with the Philippines and perhaps to a lesser extent Japan, though those tensions might continue to rise. But I think China's also going to continue its policies of trying to invest heavily in Africa and Latin America as it tries to carve out a geopolitical space against the United States. I'm not suggesting that there's going to be conflict with the United States per se, but there certainly is tension, and there will be, as both countries, I think, sort of vie to continue their superpower status.
Well, Mark, thank you for your analysis, and thank you for watching LIGNET.com.